Welcome to the Green Left Show. My name's Isaac and I'm speaking to you from Gadigal Country or Sydney.
And I'm Riley Breen. I'm speaking to you from the land of the Whadjuk Noongar here in Bulu, Perth.
Today we're talking to Tilda, who's an activist with Disrupt Burrup Hub, which is a climate group opposing the massive Burrup Hub gas project. And Tilda was recently fined $2,000 for an action she took part in against a Woodside, which is a massive fossil fuel company. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that this show was produced on stolen Aboriginal land that always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and sovereignty was never ceded. If you'd like to support this show, you can become a supporter at greenleft.org.au/support. Plans start from just $5 a month, and it's the best way to help this show continue and to receive our content. Now, on with the interview.
Hey, my name's Riley Breen, and today we're talking to Tilda from Disrupt Burrup Hub. They're a group of climate activists opposing the destructive Burrup Hub gas project. Thanks for joining us, Tilda.
Thank you for having me.
Tilda, my name's Isaac. I'm speaking from Gadigal land here in Sydney. So you're one of 4 Disrupt Burrup Hub activists who were taken to court recently for protesting for the climate. I guess for people who haven't been following this, could you tell us about the action that you were actually charged for?
Yes, yeah. So the Disrupt Burrup Hub campaign, for those of you who are unfamiliar, we are a group of grassroots climate activists doing non-violent direct action here on Noongar land in Perth to oppose Woodside's Northwest Shelf extension, which is part of their Burrup Hub gas processing facility up about, I think it's like 1,800 kilometers north of Perth in Whoop Whoop, basically. And yeah, so my action was part of a series of sort of escalatory protests that happened in 2023 against Woodside. We saw people turn up to state parliament, invade the pitch at Freo Dockers games, all this other fun stuff. But what I went and did was on the morning of, I think it was the 1st of August 2023, I showed up at the house of their CEO, Meg O'Neill, armed with some paint and a bike lock. And so the idea was that we were going to give her retaining wall some hell, and then I would chain myself to her gate, preventing her from leaving to work that morning in her Maserati.
Just a bit of redecorating.
Yeah, it's public service.
Yeah, so that case, I mean, that action got a lot of kind of media attention, particularly from the kind of right-wing media. But what's the latest with the court case? What have you found out in the last few weeks?
Yes, yeah. So I've been in court for it was 17 months, which was a very, very long time. If you've ever been to court, hopefully you haven't, but going once is more than enough. But I think I racked up I was doing about 1 appearance a month, but my legal proceedings finally concluded on, I believe it was Monday or Tuesday of last week. God, my memory's foggy already. And basically, what we had sort of negotiated was my lawyer, she is amazing. She managed to get my charges downgraded. So the initial charge of conspiracy to commit an indictable offence, the indictable offence being criminal damage, was dropped. So we sort of entered guilty pleas. On our second last court appearance, 2 downgraded charges, which was attempted unlawful damage and attempted trespass. And then my very last court date, I was sentenced for this protest. So I ultimately ended up receiving a $2,000 fine. And since I have no priors and they've deemed me as having little risk of reoffending, I have been granted a spent conviction, meaning it won't show up on my criminal record when, I don't know, I go to get hired somewhere that checks that stuff. So yeah, all in all, like, an outcome I'm pretty satisfied with.
And what were the fines like, both for yourself and for the other activists that were charged?
Yeah, so I believe Emil, Davey, and we both received $2,000 fines. But for Jesse and Jared, they had sort of more of a history of climate protest base offending. They've been in the game for longer than we have, got a few more charges than we have. So ultimately, because of that, and then their age, considering like they're in their 30s, whereas a mill and I are in their 20s. I think their fines were like something like, I think it was like 2,600 to 2,800 each. So just a few $100s higher.
And so that's $9,000 all up between the four of you. I mean, that's, probably the best you could have hoped for, but it's still an obscene amount of money. Considering I think I saw you in a video recently where you talked about the amount of money Santos was fined for an oil spill. In comparison, it was something like almost as much for an oil spill.
Oh my gosh, yeah. We did the maths, and for the Santos oil spill, where they spilled 25,000 liters of oil in the Indian Ocean off the coast of WA, which ultimately killed 3 dolphins. They got fined $10,000 for that. Plus there was a little bit of like a cleanup fee, but all in all, it was around 20,000. But just like the criminal fine minus the cleanup fee, $10,000. So that's 44 cents per liter of oil, which is kind of a bargain, really. And then for us, it was like something like $2,000 per liter of paint. So it's like 5,000 times the cost, which is just a bit wacky. Not that I'm sort of crying foul and being like, oh, I shouldn't have got a smaller fine, but you'd think that Santos would have been fined a far larger amount than us for.
Yeah, absolutely. So could you tell us a bit more about this Burrup Hub project and why it's necessary to take these kinds of actions to try and stop it?
Yeah, sure. So the Burrup Hub is a collection of sort of different plants and projects, mostly owned and ran by Woodside in the northwest of WA, sort of near Karratha. And basically it's as dubbed by Woodside's former climate advisor, Alex Hillman, they're currently the biggest climate decision any Australian will ever make as to whether it gets approved or not. And I think Tanya Plibersek is due to approve it like quite literally in 9 days' time. Or she might not approve it, but I mean, with Labor's track record, really, what are they going to do? Say no? So yeah, but basically this approval for the project that's currently up in front of Plibersek will allow the Burrup Hub to operate until 2070, which is when I'll be 66. And in that time, it's going to release, I think, 6 billion tons of CO2, which is absurd. But also, aside from the CO2, which is going to wreck our climate, the sort of gas processing is really, it results in a lot of nitrous oxide emissions. So the air over the Burrup Hub actually has the highest concentrate of nitrous oxide in the Southern Hemisphere. And that's not, I mean, I didn't even know what nitrous oxide really was before, or I think it's NO2, nitrous dioxide. I don't know, I'm an art student, but basically I'm going to call it NO2 for clarity. NO2, that's pretty abstract, don't really know what it is, like, fair enough. Oh, sorry, if you don't really know what it is, fair enough. But I do, and what it's doing and what the rock art research team at UWA has been studying for a number of years is that NO2 is actually degrading the patina of all of the rock art around the Burrup Hub, because not only is this project destroying the climate, it's also destroying culture. There's over 1 million pieces of individual rock art or petroglyphs sort of scattered around the rocks, like, which the Burrup Hub was literally built on top of. There's footage of Woodside like exploding these like sacred carvings back in the 1970s. So even though they're not like detonating them now to build like car parks for their gas plant workers or whatever, they're all the emissions from the project are like erasing them anyways. So these 50,000-year-old carvings are probably going to fade entirely in a matter of decades due to Woodside's gas production. So it's just bad all around.
Yeah, I mean, if I remember my high school chemistry correctly, nitrous oxide is actually one of the causes of acid rain, which I grew up on stories of being as though they were a thing of the past that had been solved. But this literally, I think Raylene Cooper from Save Our Songlines, who also is an activist up around the same area trying to prevent the same projects. She spoke at Eco-Socialism last year about the same thing, about the acid rain degrading the rock art. And it's like, this is 2025. Like, I thought this was a problem in the 1980s when we still had, what was the carbo CFCs in our refrigerators causing ozone holes.
Yeah, it's pretty like crazy and pretty devastating, as you said, that this project or these projects are not only destroying the climate and like obviously immediately in the area and in WA, but also impacting, climate change all around the world. And also, as you said, destroying these really important and culturally significant and, one of a kind, basically, First Nations cultural sites. So, but then you can see that the government and the officials are more concerned with, shutting down protesters and stopping you guys from calling out the companies that are actually responsible for this than actually stopping these projects. You made a comment just before about like Labor's record in government about what they've done around the climate. I just wondered if you had any more thoughts on, I guess, how disappointing the Labor government's been on this.
Oh my God, I have so many thoughts. I could keep you here for 8 hours. But I don't know. I just think Labor, I mean, it's so nefarious because you see the Liberals and you see the Nationals and they're up to like dodgy shit when it comes to the climate. They're not trying to hide that. But I think with the Labor Party, they love to really greenwash themselves. Like they really do. And so I remember, I think it was end of last year, early this year, Tanya Plibersek comes out and she's like, my government hasn't approved any new coal mines in the last year. But then what she failed to mention was the fact that she had granted like several dozen extensions to coal mines, allowing them to operate like, I mean, cumulatively between all of these coal mines, like hundreds of years into the future. Like there's some that are running up until 2070. So, like they sort of posit themselves as being like the progressive climate party out of the Liberals and Labor, but really like they're almost as bad as each other on some fronts. And I just think as well, like what we're seeing particularly in WA is the like industry capture of the Labor Party, I just think is getting worse and worse as the years drag by. Or maybe it's not getting worse, maybe they're just getting like less lazy about covering it up. Or more lazy. Oh, who knows? But yeah, like I know with like the nature positive laws recently where like Plibersek had struck this deal with like I think the Greens and a bunch of backbenchers and independents and whatnot about like passing these great new nature laws. And then at the 11th hour, Roger Cook calls Albanese and says, hey, these are actually going to negatively impact WA's industries. Can you call them? So now we don't have new nature laws that we so desperately need. Yay! Because Roger Cook was acting sort of, I don't know, in the interest of like lobby groups rather than like the people who he's supposed to represent, i.e. like you and me, which is so awesome. But yeah, no, I'm really hoping that like WA has a state election on March 8th and it's likely going to be a Labor victory again, but it'll sort of be a certain swing away from like the Labor supermajority we had in 2021 with COVID. So I'm looking forward to hopefully getting like a bigger diversity of voices in Parliament for sure. Yeah, God, the Labor Party I hate that. I shouldn't say that.
I don't think that's a controversial take on this show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like it goes to show we obviously can't rely on Labor to enact any of the changes that we desperately need. And I guess what we look to instead is, these grassroots movements that they're building. I mean, we've seen a big wave of young people taking climate action into their own hands, particularly following the kind of school strike, Greta Thunberg inspired movement. And now there's all these different climate movements popping up. Obviously, Disrupt Burrup Hub, and over here on the east, we've got the Rising Tide crew who are doing a lot of good work disrupting the Newcastle port. So I guess just following on from that, what kind of inspired you to kind of take action as a young person yourself?
Yeah, I think for me, it was definitely Greta Thunberg. Hey, like, I think for so many people my age, like, she came at such a great time. I think she was maybe only like the year older than me or my age, maybe. But yeah, I was 15 when she sort of really started taking off. And I had a friend who'd gone to like the very first school strike for Climate Perth movement. And they kind of tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, you should really get involved with this. So then I went to like banner painting and the rest was history. So yeah, that was like really special. I was involved in it, school strike from 2019 to when I graduated in 2021. And I think we did a lot of really special work. I remember like the first protest I ever went to was the March 2019 strike, and we had something like 5,000 students there. So already like the vibes were so high, and it was just an amazing time to jump in. And yeah, like it was just so great. Unfortunately, I think COVID really took a lot of the momentum away from that movement globally. And I know I like sort of just tapped out after I left school because there wasn't really like anything else going on that felt I could get behind, or felt like was like particularly focused on young people. I think unfortunately the climate movement does suffer a lot from like the fact, not suffer, but there's a lot out there for retirees. Like every climate group you go to, it's just full of retirees, which is great. Like they're such a valuable part of the movement. They have so much time on their hands, they have so much experience, so much love to them. But as a young person being in a space where like the median age is like 70, it can feel a little bit um, feels like you're a bit out of place. So yeah, I think it's really great to see this like tradition of youth movements that sort of not Greta Thunberg started. I mean, student movements have existed for like the last couple of centuries, but it's great to see like them still continuing to thrive in the 2020s as sort of school strike like takes a back seat, and all these other groups like DBH and Rising Tide and Youth Demand in the UK, I think are doing amazing work. Like they're all sort of getting their little moment now, which is so cool. And yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to Rising Tide too, because I'm originally from Newcastle. So I think like moving from the world's largest coal port to the world's largest sort of gas capital, or the Southern Hemisphere's largest gas capital, it really has been a breeding ground for climate radicalization. For sure.
Yeah, 100%. I guess that like now what we're seeing in response to some of these actions that these different groups are taking is a bit of a ramping up of repression of protests. And I mean, it's not just the climate movement; it's also we've seen a repression of Palestine solidarity protesters. So yeah, the climate and anti-war in particular are being targeted. But why do you think there's this like escalating repression? Both from governments introducing these new anti-protest laws and things like that, and the police ramping up the actions on the street.
I just think at the end of the day, it's because it's working really. I think particularly with like the climate movement and the anti-war movement being cracked down on, I think it's because these movements have gained like amazing traction over the past few years. And with that, there's so many more people sort of keen to get involved, keen to like come on in. And at the end of the day, it means that they're like the two largest threats to the status quo, right? Like they're threatening the vested interests of like corporations and governments, and just yeah, like why would they want them to continue and thrive? So I think shutting them down sort of allows big business to stay happy, and allows the government to keep on cashing in on those checks from big business that are allowing them to like, I don't know, buy cork flutes and whatnot for the upcoming election. And yeah, at the end of the day, I just think it really does come down to like money and capitalism, and just how like fucking evil it is. It really is. But
You were talking before about how, and I completely agree with you, how the Liberal Party is kind of nakedly evil in most ways. They don't really hide it, whereas the Labor Party, pretends they're kind of climate fakers in a way. They kind of pretend to do one thing while they're really doing another thing. Although one of the interesting thing that the Liberal Party has been doing, which may be some kind of way of pretending they're doing something about climate, I don't know, is this kind of push for nuclear. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that kind of angle of it, the whole the Liberal Party's really full-on approach to nuclear.
Well, I think that I hate making comments as like, oh, like nuclear is great, nuclear is bad, because you're always gonna like annoy someone. But I just think specifically with like the Liberal Party's push for nuclear, it's just such a big attempt to just prop the fossil fuel industry up, because I don't have the exact turnaround time in my head right now, but I mean it's gonna take like a decade before these things even come into play, which I mean, if you're paying attention to like the climate targets of literally any environmental group, it's like net zero emissions by 2030, which I mean, we're not achieving under Labor or Liberal. It's a pipe dream. It would be great. But I think with the Liberal Party, like we're not even going to see any sort of step towards renewables ever, really. And what was I going to say? Yeah, and I just think as well, like the CSIRO's own modeling after the Liberal Party sort of like brought up this idea showed that it's not going to be cheap. It's not going to be quick. It's going to lead to our power bills getting more expensive, which is another great initiative from the economic managers, the Liberal Party. Yeah, it's not done with like the interest of you and me and like our power bills in mind. It's definitely so like Woodside and Adani and whatnot can keep pumping out their fossil fuels until these like prohibitively expensive, prohibitively slow nuclear plants are like built. Even then, will they deliver 100% of the power grid? I don't know. I'm not a nuclear expert, but I assume any gaps in the market will be made up again by like fossil fuels. So yeah, it's really disappointing to see. I think what some people seem to think could actually be like a really great sort of low emission type of power generation be utilized like for the like a net negative effect on the environment. So, ooh.
I guess it's like we live in a country that has plenty of, sun, wind,
Oh, yeah.
sea, so we can use
Literally.
those sources.
That too. Oh my God, how could I not even mention that? But yeah, I think like nuclear, it makes so much sense in places like Germany and Japan where it's like, okay, like a solar panel's gonna work there. Probably not. But here it's like we literally makes so much sense. And I'm so sick of the solar panels being equated with like the woke agenda. Like, is it woke to do like the easiest thing to generate power? It's just so
Yeah, and they
evil.
handily have no answers of where the nuclear waste is going to be dumped, things like that. Like, there's a lot of those kind of questions that they just kind of push to the side, like la 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 la. I think as well, like with the nuclear stuff, we've got Labor trying to do this nuclear-powered submarine deal with the US and under the AUKUS scheme, so they can't really call out some of the problems with nuclear because they're also going for a nuclear submarine. So it's like leaves them trapped. So that's given Dutton the perfect avenue to spruik nuclear. One thing I wanted to ask you about was transport emissions, because that's something I feel like doesn't often get talked about. But there's a report that said transport is going to be one of the highest sources of emissions by 2030. Obviously, all the cars on the road and planes and things like that. So obviously, there's solutions that have been put forward, like shifting to public transport. Some people think electric vehicles are the answer. What are your kind of thoughts on the whole transport emissions and what can we do about it?
Amazing question, and I've never been asked that before. This is really exciting. I'm thinking of transport emissions, and I think this like, I was reading this really interesting book about like degrowth capitalism, but then she was like, oh, it was by Katie Soper, and I've completely forgotten the name, but it was something about you had to like present it in a way that sparked joy. But yeah, just like something like a short plane trip across the US produces more carbon emissions than like someone will in an entire year in like sort of, I don't know, like I'm trying to think of the word to use and I've forgotten it, like just someone in like the global south, I guess. Which is crazy. And yeah, I just think like in terms of transport emissions, I think we have to radically alter the way it comes with like I just don't think like EVs are gonna necessarily be like the fix all. I think to really sort of like tackle these, there's gonna have to be like a radical shift in the way we like live and produce and consume. And I just don't think we can continue to like be like, like normalize things like Euro summer or like, just like 5-minute drive down to IGA when it would be like a 10-minute walk, stuff like that. But I just think these things like so ingrained in our way of life here in the West, it's almost seen as like a right. Like it's like your right to go to Italy and like sip that little like limoncello on a beach. It's your right to like take like a 2-minute car ride when it would have been like a 5-minute walk. And I just think like without a radical change in our thinking, like it's just like, yeah, it's always going to be an issue, which sucks. So I think I'm a very big sort of advocate. Oh, I never said this out loud before, but definitely for like a sort of like degrowth, like societal type shift in the way we, I guess, consume and live. Because yeah, it's just really not sustainable at a large scale.
I guess I wanted to ask, what do you kind of think of as the next steps for the climate movement? Now you've had this kind of court case that you've had to deal with, and that's gone through, and you've gotten the fine, and obviously you're not going to not do anything about the climate ever again, but there's obviously things to consider. And I guess on a broader scale, where do you think is the way to go to actually build resistance to the kind of fossil fuel industry?
That's a really good question. And again, one I don't often get asked, especially in the sort of interviews by the media outlets that have been covering my court case up until now. Shout out Seven West. But yeah, I think the next steps forward definitely look a lot like more like mass action. And I think that was always the idea behind Disrupt Burrup Hub. I think it was like really great while it's been going. I think we're looking to kick it off again this year after being on a little bit of a hiatus because all of us have been in court and had all these bail conditions, and it probably wouldn't have been great for our, I guess our freedom if we'd gone and get arrested and then been sent off to prison for being naughty one too many times while we're still sort of like on bail. But I think now that's all sort of winding down. We're really looking to kick things back into gear with like and I don't think this is just a thing for DBH, but I think actually like trying to build a mass movement is where everyone should be diverting their efforts, not only because I think historically mass movements are what have enacted change. I think as well, in terms of like combating police repression and stuff, it's a lot harder to arrest demonstrations of like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people than like arrest like one chick with a bike lock at someone's house. But I think the issue is with like building those, obviously, it's like, I mean, who doesn't want a mass movement? Like, why am I saying that? Like, it's like, I don't think there's anyone out there who's like anti-mass protest, but building them is where the real issue lies. And I've been sort of having this conversation with friends and I'm like, oh, like I really want to get something going, but also like, is Perth, WA going to be like the ground zero for the next mass climate movement?
Yeah, it's really hard here. I know exactly the struggles. I mean, I was at that the mass protest that we had last year for DBH, and I was the one person who got arrested at it.
Yeah. I just remember that photo of you being like dragged off. It's pretty gnarly.
We can edit that in. But yeah, no, I certainly know how hard it is in Perth because it's just so isolated. People just don't really come out for demonstrations quite so much, and we're just small. But I think at the same time, we've talked about how we are the number one petro state in WA. We are, we are at this critical moment with Disrupt Burrup Hub and unlawful projects that are just, just they have to be stopped. And if we don't, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. So I don't know. I hope that kind of leads to something happening.
No, for sure. I think I just had a thought and now I've lost it. No, and I think like again, like that's exactly the reason why I think I'm so like determined, because it feels like, oh, if no one else is gonna do it in Perth, then like I guess it's me. I guess this has to be my job. And I think, yeah, even though we have probably some of the most complacent people in the nation when it comes to like acting on climate change, because either you're cashing a Woodside check, your dad is, or your neighbor is, like someone in your life's cashing a Woodside check.
Or you got a Woodside Nippers, your child learns to swim at Woodside Nippers, or you're a fan of Perth Festival or whatever, sponsored by Woodside, and you see Woodside ads everywhere. Like the state capture isn't just that they're in the pockets of the government, but they sponsor everything. Everything just has Woodside, BHP everywhere.
Yeah. They're even like sponsoring the building of new schools now, which is like crazy. I just don't think that should be allowed. Like maybe pay your royalties and then they can be used to build a school, but then it's not going to have your logo all over it. Like wild stuff, wild stuff.
So in terms of DBH, I mean, obviously, if you're not in WA, it's probably quite hard to get involved. But if you are in WA, how can people get involved? And for those who aren't and still want to support, what could they do to support?
Amazing question. I think I'm looking up our website because I've forgotten the link, but I think it's www.disruptburruphub.com. Yes, it is. And when you go onto the website, there's this lovely little get involved page. This is probably more useful for if you're in WA, because most of our campaign activities right now, like all of our campaign activities, are being organised by people based here. But if you're interstate, it's still worth chucking down your details. I know there was actually like a little DBH offshoot group in Victoria who staged a protest outside the Woodside HQ there. And those were all people who, some of them like had just known each other through the climate movement, but some of them I think were people who like we got from our website who said they were keen. So you never know when the chance might strike. But yeah, I think if you're in WA, we're looking to start our sort of mobilisation and campaigning and protesting efforts like back up over the next couple months. So if you sign up, you'll be hearing from us soon. And I guess if you're interstate and you're like, okay, like probably don't want to campaign, probably don't want to protest, or even if you're in WA and you're thinking those things, I think I hate asking people for money, but also our fines. I think we've crowdfunded pretty well to cover mine, but we've got people in court over the next few months for a Woodside evacuation action, which meant that 2,500 workers had to leave the Woodside HQ, and that it like stunk. It really stunk in there because of the gas we released. It wasn't harmful, but it just smelled really bad. So the fine for that is going to be astronomical, as is the fine for a similar action we attempted to do at the Woodside AGM where the gas wasn't released. So if you would like to cover some of our fines, like even chipping in $5, just so the financial burden for us isn't like crippling, because I know like I did not have enough in my savings account to cover my full fine. So that would be amazing. But also acknowledging it is obviously like a cosy lives crisis, as some are saying, as we all know. So yeah, no obligation to donate. But if you have spare $5, we'll use it well.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tilda. It's been great to chat to you, and we'll put all the links to the website and the socials and stuff in the description of this as well, so people can easily find that. And yes, please do donate to Disrupt Burrup Hub if you can, pay some of those fines, and also help with some future work. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up, Tilda?
I think I've said it all. Hey, just fuck Woodside.
Fuck Woodside.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to end it on, and we'll continue covering the amazing actions that you and Disrupt Burrup Hub do over the next few months and into the future as well. So yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thanks,
Thank
Tilda.
you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Green Left Show. As I said at the start, if you'd like to support the work we do, head to greenleft.org.au/support, and plans start from just $5 a month. Also, make sure to check out Disrupt Burrup Hub. We've put the links in the description to the website and to the crowdfunding link. And we'll see you next week for another episode. Thanks for watching.